He raised his glass, grinning smugly. How does it feel to be a loser, living off your wife like that? The whole table burst out laughing, and my wife laughed the loudest. I leaned back in my chair, letting that laughter scrape across every inch of my pride. Each sound was a blade twisting deeper. They thought I was a freeloader, a decorative accessory to match my wife's dress. I stood up, slowly, adjusted my tie, locked eyes with CEO Richard Hayes. You have 24 hours to enjoy your position, because this loser is the one who will be signing your termination papers. His face drained of color. The room went dead silent, so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat, and in that moment, I knew. It was time to remind them, and my wife, exactly who I really was. If it were you, humiliated in front of the person you love, would you walk away quietly or stand up? The Waldorf Astoria ballroom glittered under chandeliers the size of small cars. Gold light spilled over white linen tables, polished silverware, and the kind of crystal glasses that felt too delicate to touch. Waiters in tuxedos glided between clusters of executives, topping off champagne flutes and laughing at jokes they'd heard 100 times before. Emily stood across the room, radiant in an emerald gown that caught the light with every movement. She was in her element, head tilted back, smiling at something Chad Wilson said, one manicured hand resting lightly on his arm. I'd seen that smile at 100 corporate events, the one that said she belonged here among the power brokers and the people who spoke in quarterly earnings. I sipped my whiskey. It tasted like disappointment and burnt oak. I wasn't part of this world anymore, not since I'd stepped away from the spotlight 15 years ago. That was fine, by choice. But watching her there, laughing so easily while I stood alone, I couldn't help but feel like an uninvited guest in my own life. The truth was, they didn't know me, not really, and tonight, that ignorance was about to cost them. Chad Wilson's voice cut through the low hum of conversation like a blade on glass. "Jack, get over here, buddy," he called, waving me toward a small circle of Emily's colleagues. His smile was all teeth, practiced, confident, the kind of grin that belonged to a man who'd never been told no. Richard Hayes, the CEO, stood among them, immaculate in a midnight suit, a glass of champagne in hand. A few other executives clustered close, their name tags meaningless to me. Emily slipped her arm through mine as I joined them, her corporate wife's smile perfectly in place. Chad raised his glass. "So tell me, Jack," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "what's it like being married to Atlas Dynamics' rising star?" He nodded toward Emily like she was a trophy he'd just discovered. I kept my face neutral. Chad leaned in. "Must be nice having a sugar mama, huh?" A ripple of laughter passed through the group. Emily didn't flinch. She laughed right along with them. That was the first cut. And like any predator who smells blood, Chad wasn't about to stop there. Chad swirled the champagne in his glass, eyes glittering with mischief. "I mean, seriously, Jack," he said, pitching his voice just a notch louder. "What do you even do all day while Emily's out here killing it in the business world? Watch Netflix? Play video games?" The circle erupted in laughter again, louder this time. Even a couple of people at nearby tables turned to see what was so funny. Emily's grip on my arm tightened, but when I looked at her, there was no anger on my behalf, no discomfort. Just that same polished smile like this was harmless fun. Richard Hayes gave a polite chuckle, half-heartedly trying to redirect. "Maybe we should—" Chad waved him off. No, I'm genuinely curious," he pressed, locking eyes with me now. "Jack seems like a nice enough guy, but let's be real." And then came the line. "What's it like being a loser? Having your wife pay all the bills?" The laughter that followed was the loudest yet. It rolled over me in waves, and standing there, I felt something cold settle deep in my chest. For a heartbeat, the ballroom felt smaller, the air heavier. Their laughter echoed in my head, each chuckle hammering against the walls of my patience. 15 years of staying quiet, letting them believe whatever story Emily allowed to circulate, came crashing to a single razor-sharp moment. Emily's laughter cut the deepest. Not nervous, not forced, genuine, like Chad's words were a perfectly acceptable punchline. I let the noise wash over me, kept my posture loose, my expression calm. Inside, something shifted. Maybe it was the whiskey. Maybe it was the years of being treated like a +1 instead of a partner. Or maybe I was just done. I straightened, rolling my shoulders back. The laughter faltered as a few people noticed the change. My gaze found Richard Hayes, still holding his glass midair. "You know, Richard," I said evenly, "it must seem strange from where you're standing." The room began to quiet. "But I wonder, how does it feel to know that this so-called loser owns 90% of Atlas Dynamics?" Silence. And then, for the first time all night, every single pair of eyes was on me. Richard Hayes froze, his champagne glass suspended halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale under the warm glow of the chandeliers. Emily's arm slipped away from mine. She stared at me, mouth slightly open, like she'd just misheard something impossible. Chad's smug grin collapsed into confusion, his brows knitting together as he tried to process what I'd said. "What?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. I let my eyes sweep over the table, over the people who'd been laughing seconds ago. Did I stutter? My tone stayed calm, but the words carried weight. "You remember Orion Systems?" I asked Richard, leaning in slightly. "That little tech startup that merged with Atlas Dynamics 5 years ago? The one that pulled you back from bankruptcy?" Recognition flickered in his eyes. "That was mine," I said, letting the truth hang in the air. "Still is, actually." Emily's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the marble floor. Red wine spread like blood across the white linen. The sound snapped the room into a stunned, breathless silence. The shatter of glass seemed to break whatever spell had frozen the room. Conversations flared in hushed tones. Chairs scraped. People leaned toward each other, whispering, trying to make sense of what they'd just heard. I'd said enough. I adjusted my tie, straightened my jacket, and stepped back from the table. Emily's eyes followed me, wide and unblinking, but she didn't say a word. Richard was still rooted in place, his grip tight on the stem of his glass, as if letting go might make the truth I'd dropped any more real. Without another glance at Chad or the rest of them, I turned toward the exit. The marble floor of the ballroom amplified every step I took, each one a quiet declaration that the game had just changed. Behind me, voices rose. Richard's panicked, Emily's calling my name, Chad demanding to know if what I'd said was true. But I didn't look back. If they wanted answers, they'd have to work for them. Tonight, I was done standing in the corner while everyone else wrote my story. It was time to start telling it myself. The moment I pushed through the ballroom doors, the noise dimmed, replaced by the soft hum of the hotel lobby. The marble gleamed under the warm lights, a polished stage for my exit. I was halfway to the revolving doors when I heard it, rapid, sharp clicks of heels on stone. "Jack! Jack! Wait!" Emily's voice cut through the ambient chatter of tourists checking in and business travelers dragging suitcases. I didn't slow down. If anything, I walked faster, hands buried deep in my pockets. "Jack, damn it, stop!" There was desperation in her tone, the kind I hadn't heard in years, not since the night her father had a heart attack. I could hear her stumble, those designer heels not built for speed. And then she caught up, fingers clamping onto my arm, spinning me halfway toward her. Her breath was ragged, her emerald gown slightly creased from the chase. "What the hell do you mean you own the company?" she demanded, eyes sharp, searching my face for some kind of joke. I stayed still for a moment, letting the weight of her grip sink in before I answered. I didn't turn to face her right away. I could hear the rush of her breathing, feel the tension in her manicured fingers digging into my jacket sleeve. When I finally looked at her, Emily's flawless makeup was beginning to smudge beneath her eyes, and a strand of hair had fallen loose from the perfect twist she'd worn all evening. "You really don't know, do you?" I said quietly, studying her expression. Her brow furrowed. "Don't be cryptic with me right now. Explain to me how you can possibly own 90% of Atlas Dynamics when you've been unemployed for the past 3 years. Unemployed, I repeated, letting the word hang. It had been whispered before, but never to my face. That's what you think I've been doing? Sitting around while you bring home the bacon? I gave a humorless laugh. Well, what else would you call it? She shot back, voice rising enough to draw glances from people passing through the lobby. I stepped closer, lowering my tone so only she could hear. I'd call it building a life that didn't need to flaunt itself, and letting you believe whatever story made you feel bigger. She crossed her arms, the silk of her gown whispering with the movement. You haven't had a real job since you sold that little software company back in... That little software company, I cut in, was Orion Systems. And I didn't just sell it, Emily. I merged it with a failing tech firm called Atlas Dynamics. Ring any bells? The color drained from her face. I could see the gears turning, memories resurfacing. Conversations from years ago, back when she was still a junior analyst and I was still in the game. That's impossible, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Orion Systems wasn't some hobby project, I continued. The merger saved Atlas from bankruptcy. It was worth hundreds of millions. Her lips parted, but no words came. It is worth hundreds of millions, I corrected. Present tense, because I never sold my shares. I just stepped back from day-to-day operations and let Richard run the show, while I focused on other things. She blinked at me. Other things like what? I held her gaze. Like being your husband. Like paying the bills. Like supporting your career while everyone assumed I was just along for the ride. Emily stared at me, her perfectly composed executive mask slipping. For a moment, she looked less like the confident woman who commanded boardrooms, and more like someone trying to reconcile two versions of the same man. All those times I introduced you as someone who used to work in tech, she murmured, almost to herself. All those dinner parties where I joked about you being retired at 45. I didn't say anything. I just let her hear her own words out loud. You never corrected me, she said, her voice thin now. Because I wanted to know if you loved me for me, I replied evenly. Not for the numbers in my portfolio, not for the title on my business card. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. If that's true, then why tell me now? I stepped closer, my voice low, steady. Because tonight you laughed, Emily, when Chad called me a loser, when they all did, and after 15 years together, you didn't defend me once. Her breath caught. She opened her mouth to speak, but for the first time in years, I turned and walked away before she could find the words. I didn't look back as I left Emily standing there, the weight of everything hanging between us like a thick fog. For years, I had stayed silent, content to play the role everyone expected, the supportive husband in the background, invisible yet steady. But tonight, that act was over. In the quiet of my car, I ran my hands over the steering wheel, knuckles white. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by something colder, more determined. It wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about respect. Respect I deserved. Respect I hadn't seen in 15 years, not from her, not from those around me. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus, my lawyer, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. This time I wasn't going to be invisible. I was ready to remind everyone who I really was. Back home, I headed straight to my office, the one room Emily rarely entered. She called it my man cave, a place where I supposedly wasted my days on trivial hobbies. But behind the ordinary facade was a hidden panel built into the bookshelf. I pressed the secret latch, and the panel swung open to reveal a fireproof safe. Inside lay the most important documents of my life: contracts, merger papers, and ownership certificates. I pulled out the thick folder labeled Atlas Holdings and spread the papers across my desk like a dealer laying down a winning hand. Every page told the same story. Jack Morgan, the man everyone thought was living off his wife's success, was the majority owner of the company that employed them all. I ran my fingers over Richard Hayes' signature, dated 15 years ago, the day he begged me to save Atlas Dynamics from collapse. That signature meant power. It meant control. And tonight, it meant I was done hiding. 15 years ago, Richard Hayes had come to me desperate, sweat soaking through his expensive suit. Our company's failing, he said, voice shaking. If this merger doesn't work, we're finished. I had been expanding Orion Systems then, and the offer was too good to ignore. But I didn't just buy a failing company. I structured the deal to keep Atlas Dynamics alive while giving myself controlling interest, 90% ownership, full voting rights, and veto power over major decisions. Richard kept his CEO title and salary. His employees kept their jobs. Everyone won, except they didn't realize who was really in charge. To keep my involvement private, I created a blind trust. Most thought the mysterious investor who saved Atlas preferred to stay anonymous. Only a handful knew the truth, and they were bound by ironclad confidentiality agreements. Tonight, that secret was about to unravel. The blind trust was my shield, the reason no one suspected I was pulling the strings behind the scenes. All my shares were held by a private investment firm, my identity hidden from public records. I could step out from behind that curtain any time I wanted. The legal documents were clear, written notice to the trustee and the board, and control was mine to claim. For years, I chose to stay in the shadows. I collected dividends quietly, enjoying my retirement, while Emily built her career on the foundation I'd laid. But tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't content with being invisible anymore. The humiliation, the disrespect, it was time to make them all remember who I really was. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. "It's time," I said. "Prepare for a full financial audit of Atlas Dynamics. Executive compensation, expenses, conflicts of interest, everything." He paused on the other end, then said, "Are you sure you want to shake the hive like this?" I smiled, cold and steady. "Yes, it's time they see the real king." Marcus worked through the night, digging deep into the company's records. By morning, the first reports came in, executive compensation packages that were obscene, expense accounts filled with lavish dinners and luxury trips disguised as client entertainment. More troubling were the patterns of nepotism and favoritism. Contracts steered toward friends and family, decisions made for personal gain instead of the company's good. Richard Hayes had grown comfortable, too comfortable. He thought the mysterious investor would never look beneath the surface, never question how the company was run as long as profits kept flowing. I sat back in my chair, a cold smile spreading across my face. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They were about to learn how wrong they were. By mid-morning, I sent the formal audit request to the board, demanding a full breakdown of all executive spending and potential conflicts of interest. Marcus had also prepared a notice for an emergency board meeting, one they wouldn't be able to ignore. Word spread fast. Within hours, Chad Wilson was called into HR. Official reason: review of recent conduct at corporate events. Unofficial reason: my audit had lit a fire under Richard's complacent leadership. Chad, the golden boy who'd mocked me mercilessly, was suddenly on thin ice. I leaned back, savoring the shift in power. The man who thought he could throw insults without consequence was about to learn that every action has its price, especially when you're mocking the man who owns the company. Richard's panic was palpable, his inbox flooded with my demands, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. He sent a polite email, offering to discuss concerns in a more informal setting, trying to smooth things over before the storm hit full force. But I wasn't interested in casual talks or empty promises. I replied firmly, "No exceptions. I want all documents on my desk by 5 o'clock, and that board meeting is scheduled for this week." Behind closed doors, the whispers grew louder. Employees murmured about the sudden shakeup, speculating who would be next to fall. And at the center of it all, Richard realized he was no longer calling the shots. The real owner had arrived. As the day unfolded, Marcus's contacts inside Atlas Dynamics fed us more dirt. Security escorted Chad Wilson out of the building. Evidence had surfaced linking him to steering contracts toward his cousin's construction company. Nothing outright illegal, but certainly unethical. 2 more executives faced suspension amid investigations into personal use of corporate credit cards, extravagant vacations, and questionable vendor deals. Richard's grip on power was slipping faster than anyone anticipated. I watched the pieces fall into place, years of complacency and corruption exposed by a quiet man no one took seriously. The boardroom politics, the backdoor deals, the toxic culture, it was all unraveling, thread by thread, and I was the one pulling at the loose ends. Amid the chaos, my phone buzzed. Emily. "Everything's falling apart here," she texted. "Chad got fired. The whole office is freaking out. Richard looks like he's about to have a breakdown. Call me." I didn't answer. Instead, I typed back, "Typical Tuesday at Atlas Dynamics. Nothing to worry about." But we both knew better. What had started as a quiet assertion of control had turned into a full-scale upheaval. And poor Emily was caught right in the middle, unaware that her husband was the one pulling the strings, dismantling the empire she'd worked so hard to climb. Marcus called with urgent news. The board meeting had been moved up to tomorrow afternoon. Richard tried to push it back, but the other members demanded answers, curious about the sudden audit and the identity of the mysterious shareholder stirring the pot. By noon, the first financial reports landed on my desk. The numbers were worse than I expected. Executive bonuses bordering on obscene, corporate retreats masquerading as lavish vacations, nepotism so blatant it could have been scripted in a corporate drama. The board was scrambling to contain the fallout, but I sat back, calm and confident. This was the reckoning they'd ignored for far too long, and I was ready to make sure it counted. Knowing the fight ahead wouldn't be easy, I reached out to someone I respected within Atlas Dynamics, Samantha Brooks, the VP of Engineering. Samantha was brilliant, hardworking, and utterly overlooked by the company's old boys club. I sent her a message. "Samantha, I don't know you personally, but I've been following your work. You're exactly the kind of leader this company needs. Let's talk soon." She responded quickly, her tone cautious but hopeful. Having Samantha in my corner was crucial. She represented the future, competence over connections, results over politics. Together, we would start cleaning house. Emily's messages kept coming, growing more frantic by the hour. "Is everything okay at home?" she asked. Richard's stressed. "He got some weird email this morning." I reassured her. "Everything's fine. Tell Richard not to worry. This will work itself out." But I knew better. Nothing was going to work itself out. The machine I'd set in motion was gathering momentum, and soon, no one at Atlas Dynamics would be able to ignore it. Emily was caught in the storm, unaware that the quiet husband she'd dismissed was about to take center stage. I spent the afternoon reviewing every detail I could find on Atlas Dynamics operations. What I uncovered was worse than I imagined. The culture I'd saved from collapse had rotted under years of neglect. Toxic power plays, backdoor deals, a sense of entitlement so thick it could be cut with a knife. I opened my laptop and began drafting another email, this one to the entire board. It was time to remind them who held the real power. I hit send, watching the message vanish into their inboxes. Tonight, everything would change. No more shadows, no more silence. I was ready to step out and take control. The next morning I dressed carefully. A charcoal gray suit, tailored sharp, the kind of power suit that commands respect. Emily was already gone, off to her meetings, trying to control the damage before the board meeting. As I drove to Atlas Dynamics headquarters, the city skyline looked different, clearer, sharper, like I was seeing it through new eyes. I'd walked those halls before, but always as the quiet husband, the background figure at company picnics and holiday parties. Today, I was stepping into the building as Jack Morgan, the majority owner, the man who had been pulling the strings all along. This was no longer Emily's world alone. It was mine too. Marcus met me in the parking garage, briefcase in hand, and a knowing look on his face. "You ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready for 15 years, I replied, adjusting my tie. The elevator ride was silent except for the soft hum of the city outside. Floor after floor, I felt something shift inside me. By the time the doors opened to the executive floor, the quiet man who'd stayed in the shadows was gone. Waiting for me was Richard Hayes, pacing nervously, face pale. "Jack," he said, extending his hand with forced enthusiasm. "This is your company," I said firmly. He swallowed hard but said nothing more. It was time to remind everyone who really owned Atlas Dynamics. The boardroom doors swung open, and I stepped inside. 5 board members sat around the massive mahogany table, faces a mix of confusion and annoyance. They expected a routine meeting, nothing that would disrupt their comfortable status quo. I introduced myself. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice calm but carrying authority, "I'm Jack Morgan." Recognition dawned slowly, like the first light of dawn breaking over a city skyline. "Jack Morgan?" Patricia Hensley, the lone woman on the board, asked cautiously. "As in the Jack Morgan from Orion Systems?" "The very same," I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. The game had changed, and they were about to find out exactly how much. I spread the financial reports across the table like a dealer laying down a winning hand. Executive bonuses that bordered on obscene, expense accounts filled with extravagant dinners and luxury vacations disguised as client entertainment, nepotism so blatant it made a mockery of the company's values. I watched their faces tighten with each new revelation. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Morgan." I nodded, voice steady. "If even half of this is true, it means the company has lost its way." Richard shifted uncomfortably, sweat beading on his forehead. "I'm sure we can address these issues through proper channels," he offered weakly. "The proper channel," I interrupted, "is me taking direct control of the company I've owned all along. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a formal notice of intent. Effective immediately, I declared. I am exercising my right as majority shareholder to assume direct operational oversight of Atlas Dynamics. A murmur ran through the room, voices rising in surprise and disbelief. I raised my hand for silence. Richard Hayes's resignation will be accepted forthwith. Security will escort him from the premises by the end of the day. Eyes widened. Some exchanged uneasy glances. But that's not all, I continued. Chad Wilson's termination stands, and there will be more changes coming, starting with a complete overhaul of the executive team and corporate culture. Turning toward the windows, I looked out over the city skyline. Somewhere down there, Emily is sitting in her office, unaware that the man she thought she knew just took back what's rightfully his. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. I gathered my documents, feeling the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. As I walked toward the door, whispers erupted behind me. Phone calls hurried, hushed conversations filled with panic. For the first time in years, I felt a quiet peace. The man who once smiled and nodded while being mocked was gone. In his place stood someone who demanded respect. Long live the king. That evening, the emergency board meeting took place. 5 members sat around the table, tension thick in the air. I watched as they voted, one by one, on accepting Richard Hayes's resignation. Not a single hand hesitated. Even Patricia, who had been cautious before, raised hers firmly. Corporate loyalty was a delicate dance, and when the boss falls, everyone scrambles to save themselves. Next, the board unanimously approved Chad Wilson's permanent termination. The golden boy who once mocked me had become a corporate pariah overnight. Power had shifted, and the message was clear. No one underestimates the owner. The room buzzed with tension as I stood to make my next announcement. I am nominating Samantha Brooks as the new CEO of Atlas Dynamics. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert Chin, the board's treasurer, looked as if I'd just proposed hiring a circus clown. Samantha Brooks, from engineering? She's never held an executive position. I fixed him with a steady gaze. She's never held an executive position because this company has spent 15 years promoting based on connections, not results. Samantha had been quietly running successful projects while others played politics. She was exactly what this company needed. The vote was unanimous. Change was no longer optional. It was inevitable. 20 minutes later, Samantha arrived at the boardroom still dressed in her work clothes, khakis and a company polo. She looked out of place among the suits and ties, but her eyes burned with a fierce determination. I explained the situation and her new role. Her expression shifted from surprise to pride. I want you to run this company with respect, for the employees, for the clients, and for what Atlas Dynamics truly stands for, I told her. Tears welled in her eyes. I've watched this place from the trenches for years, she said softly. I've wanted to make a difference. Now I have the chance. As the board members filed out, I caught sight of Emily standing pale in the hallway. For the first time, her gaze held something new, respect, or maybe fear. Either way, the game had changed. I turned back to Samantha and laid out the first order of business. Review every employee's performance based on merit, not politics. I want the hardworking promoted and the dead weight removed. This company will remember what it means to earn success, not inherit it. Samantha nodded, determination shining in her eyes. I walked past Emily without a word, leaving her standing there as the reality finally sank in. The quiet husband she'd underestimated was now the man rewriting the rules. I made it 3 steps inside our front door before Emily exploded. She paced the living room like a caged tiger, mascara streaked down her cheeks. "You embarrassed me," she screamed, turning to face me. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Everyone at work is talking about how I didn't even know who my own husband was." She sounded furious, hurt, and betrayed all at once. I loosened my tie and calmly hung my jacket on the chair. "Which one are you more worried about?" I asked. Emily's voice cracked. "Don't you dare turn this around on me. I've spent years building my reputation, and you just destroyed it all in one night." I suggested we sit down, but she kept pacing, caught in the storm of her emotions. Emily stopped mid-step, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for words. I didn't, she stammered. "It was just harmless office banter," she said quickly. I repeated slowly. Harmless? Chad calling me unemployed was harmless? Him asking what it's like to be a loser? Your laughter when he said it must be strange having your wife pay the bills? She shook her head, tears welling up. I laughed because it was awkward, she protested. What was I supposed to do? 'Cause a scene at a company dinner? I looked at her, the woman I'd been married to for 15 years, caught in the painful truth. You were supposed to defend your husband, I said quietly. You were supposed to show them you knew who I really am. Emily's shoulders sagged, and she looked away, tears streaming freely now. I didn't know, she whispered. You didn't want to know, I corrected gently. You let me think you were just retired, living off investments and side gigs. You cooked dinner every night, fixed things around the house, and I thought I was supporting my unemployed husband. Her sobs filled the room, but I felt only exhaustion. Tired of being misunderstood, tired of being underestimated. I looked out the window, voice steady. I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I own. And when people thought I had nothing, they treated me like I was nothing, including you. She looked at me, broken and silent. Now you know the truth. In the weeks that followed, Atlas Dynamics transformed. I started showing up regularly, not as Emily's quiet husband, but as Jack Morgan, the man who'd been steering the ship all along. Samantha hit the ground running, implementing policies that mattered. Open-door meetings replaced closed-door secrets. Employees began speaking up without fear. Contracts and vendors were scrutinized with a fine-tooth comb. The toxic culture that had taken root under Richard's watch began to evaporate. For the first time in years, people came to work excited, and the company I saved was finally becoming the company it was meant to be. 3 months later, I found myself back in the same Waldorf Astoria ballroom where it all began. But everything was different. The corporate awards night felt like stepping into another world, one where respect was real and success was measured by impact, not politics. Samantha, now CEO, stood confidently at the podium. Please welcome Jack Morgan, she announced, her voice filled with genuine pride. Applause filled the room, warm, sincere, nothing like the mocking laughter I'd endured before. Emily sat quietly in the third row, dressed simply, watching me with a look I hadn't seen in years. Maybe respect, maybe regret. Our marriage was far from healed, but for the first time, I felt seen. And perhaps that was enough, for now. I stepped up to the microphone, looking out over faces that no longer mocked but respected. 3 months ago, many of you discovered something surprising about me. Not just that I own Atlas Dynamics, but what we've built together since. I gestured toward Samantha, pride clear in my voice. Under her leadership, this company has rediscovered its purpose, where hard work matters more than who you know, and respect isn't just a word in a mission statement. We've created opportunities where they were once scarce, giving back through the Jack Morgan Foundation to support young minds chasing their dreams. The sweetest revenge wasn't tearing down, it was building something better. So I ask you, when life tries to knock you down, do you stay silent, or rise up and reclaim what's yours? The room held its breath, and as I stepped back, I knew this was just the beginning.